There is a file in the Gotham City Police Department's Records Division, in a cabinet that requires 2 separate keys to open, that has been added to more times than any other file in the building's history. It is thick, decades of paper, reports, psychiatric evaluations, crime scene documentation, witness testimonies, court transcripts, and the careful, increasingly frustrated notes of detectives who have spent careers working on a problem that does not behave like other problems. The file is organized chronologically, the way police files are always organized, because chronology implies a story, and stories imply a beginning, and a beginning implies that someone, somewhere, made a first decision that set everything else in motion. The file has no first page, not because it was lost, not because it was removed or sealed or classified at a level above the officers who maintain the cabinet. It has no first page because no one has ever been able to agree on what should go on it. What event begins this story? What moment is the correct place to start? There is a man. He is, by any objective measure, the most dangerous individual in the history of Gotham City. His career spans decades. His casualty count, the people hurt, the people killed, the people permanently altered by proximity to him, is a number that the police department tracks in a separate document, because adding it to the main file would make the file too heavy to carry. He has been arrested more times than any other individual in the city's recorded history. He has been committed to Arkham Asylum so many times that the institution has a room considered unofficially his, the way a regular at a restaurant has a table. And in all that time, across all that paper, through all those arrests and commitments and trials and escapes and returns, no one has established with any confidence who he was before he was this, where he came from, what made him, what he was in the ordinary world before he became the thing that fills the file with no first page. His name, the name everyone knows, the name that appears in the headlines and the court documents and the reports and the file, is the Joker. Everything else is a question. Get comfortable now. Pull the blanket up. Let the night do what nights are for. Tonight's story is not the kind that resolves cleanly, because the man at its center has made very sure of that. But it is the kind of story that is worth sitting with in the dark, worth following all the way to the place it leads, which is not an answer exactly, but something more interesting than an answer. A question you will still be thinking about, quietly, long after you have drifted off. If this kind of slow journey through dark history helps you rest, a quiet like and subscribe means more than you know. And drop your location in the comments. I love knowing where in the world people are listening from tonight. Chapter 1 begins now. Let's start with the version that most people know, not because it is the true version. We will spend most of tonight examining what true means in this context, and it is a complicated examination, but because it is the version that exists at the beginning of most people's understanding of the Joker, the version that has been told and retold and adapted enough times that it has the quality of myth. And myths are worth understanding on their own terms before you start pulling at their threads. The version goes like this. There was a man. He was not a remarkable man, or not remarkably good, not in any way the world had recognized. He had talent, perhaps. He had intelligence, probably. He had a wife who loved him, and a child on the way, and a modest apartment in a part of Gotham that was not the worst part, and not the best part, which is the part where most of Gotham's ordinary people live their ordinary lives, without anyone writing stories about them. He was, by trade, a failed comedian. This detail matters, not because comedy is intrinsically significant, but because of what the failure represents. A comedian is a person who believes that they understand something about the world, about the gap between what things are supposed to be and what they are. about the absurdity that exists in the space between human dignity and human reality, and who believes that this understanding can be shared, that other people will recognize it, that the joke will land. His jokes did not land. The clubs did not call him back. The audiences sat in the particular patient silence of people waiting for something to be funny that is not going to be funny. He went home to his wife and told her it had gone well. She believed him, or chose to believe him, because love sometimes makes that choice. And the next night he went back, and the jokes did not land again. He had debts. The debts had the particular quality of debts that are approaching a threshold, not ruinous yet, but visible on the horizon, and getting closer at a pace that his income as a failed comedian could not outrun. He had tried other work. Other work had not welcomed him. He was a man whose specific talents, whatever they were not the talents that the ordinary economy rewarded. And then, two men came to see him. They were not the kind of men that a person in a desperate situation should agree to see, and some part of him knew this. They represented interests he did not ask about. They had a proposal they presented as an opportunity, which is how people in their position always present proposals. The opportunity was this. They needed someone to guide them through the Ace chemical processing plant on the edge of the Gotham River. Someone who had worked there before, who knew the layout, who could get them in and get them out. They would pay him well, better than well. He had worked at Ace Chemicals once, briefly, before the comedy. He remembered the layout. He said yes. He should not have said yes. The story would be very different if he had not said yes. But debt has a particular gravity, and he was caught in it, and so he said yes. And we follow him from that yes, through a night that the records of Gotham City have reconstructed from multiple sources and still cannot fully account for. What seems to have happened, in the broad strokes of the version everyone knows, the two men's operation went wrong. The plant was patrolled. Batman was there, because Batman was always where these things were happening by this point in Gotham's story. Lights, pursuit, chaos. The particular chaos of an industrial facility at night with running men and shouting and the echoing acoustics of large spaces where the sound bounces from every surface at once. And the man, our man, the failed comedian with the pregnant wife and the debts and the regret already crystallizing behind his sternum even as he ran, came to the edge of a catwalk above a vat of chemical waste. He fell, or he was pushed. The accounts differ, and this is one of the first places where the story starts to fray. The two criminals he had guided in that night told different stories in different configurations over the years that followed, stories shaped by what they were trying to avoid being held responsible for, which is how witness testimony works when the witnesses have their own legal situations to manage. What everyone agrees on is the chemical vat and what came out of it. The specific compounds in the Ace chemical waste stream, a proprietary mixture that the company's legal department spent considerable effort not having to describe in any public filing, had an effect on the human body that the physicians who examined him later described in clinical language that nevertheless does not quite contain the reality of what they were looking at. The pigmentation of the skin, permanently altered to a pale that wasn't quite the color of any natural thing. The hair, permanently green. The lips, permanently stretched into something that the muscles of the face were not designed to hold. An expression that had the geometry of a smile without any of the things that make a smile mean something. He survived. He walked out of the Gotham River onto its bank in the dark and the cold, and he looked at his own reflection in the water. And the version everyone knows says, that was the moment. That was when the man who had been a failed comedian and a debtor and a husband and an expectant father looked at what the chemical vat had done to his face and understood, with a sudden and absolute clarity, that the ordinary world was behind him. That the gap between what things are supposed to be and what they are, the gap he had spent his career as a comedian trying to describe to audiences who did not want to hear it, was not a subject for jokes. It was the only subject. And the correct response to it was not a punchline. It was a laugh. Loud, long, free, and absolutely without the need for anyone else to find it funny. This is the version everyone knows. It is told with variations, different comics, different adaptations, different screenwriters and directors finding different details to emphasize or omit. But its bones are these: ordinary man, desperate circumstances, chemical accident, transformation. The world broke him, and the break made him into something that the world could not contain. It is a version that makes a certain kind of sense. It is a version that has the shape of a tragedy, and tragedies are satisfying, even dark ones, because they have a shape. A beginning that explains an ending, a wound that explains the weapon. The problem is the evidence, because the more carefully you examine this version, the more precisely you trace its sources, the more honestly you assess what is established fact versus what is inference versus what is the story a story needs to tell, the more clearly you see the cracks. The wife. There are records of a woman, a young woman in Gotham, in the approximate period, whose husband vanished around the time of the incident at Ace Chemicals. The records are incomplete, which is not unusual for records of that period in that part of Gotham. Whether the wife and child actually existed, or whether they are a compassionate fiction added to the story later, added to give the man a life worth mourning, to make the tragedy more legible, is a question that no investigator has definitively answered. The two criminals. Both are dead, which is not unusual for criminals in Gotham, but is inconvenient for the record. Their testimony, such as it exists, comes from accounts given under various forms of pressure to various parties with various interests, which should always give you pause about testimony. And the man himself, the Joker. When asked in the years that followed about the night at Ace Chemicals, about whether this is the story, whether this is where he comes from, whether the failed comedian is who he was, he gives a different answer every time. Sometimes he confirms it, with the particular pleasure of someone enjoying the way a story lands on a listener. Sometimes he denies it completely, with equal pleasure. Sometimes he offers a different version entirely. I remember it differently every time I think about it. Isn't that wonderful? Memory is such a comedian. Which is, perhaps, the most important thing the Joker has ever said about the question of his origin. And we will return to it, again and again, throughout the night. But first, the most famous attempt anyone has ever made to tell this story properly. The version that a brilliant and troubled writer produced in 1988, and that has shaped every conversation about the Joker's origin that came after. The Killing Joke is next. In 1988, the writer Alan Moore and the artist Brian Bolland published a story called Batman, The Killing Joke. It is, by the assessment of most people who have spent serious time with the Batman canon, the most important single work ever produced about the Joker. Not the most comfortable, it is deeply uncomfortable, in ways that its own creators have since expressed ambivalence about. Not the most definitive, it explicitly declines to be definitive, in a way that is either its greatest weakness or its greatest sophistication, depending on how you approach it. But the most important, in the sense that almost everything written about the Joker since has been in conversation with it, either building on its framework or arguing against it, or trying to work around it. The Killing Joke presents an origin story. The failed comedian, the pregnant wife, the criminal proposition, Ace Chemicals, the vat, the river, the face in the water. The bones of the version we discussed in Chapter 1 come largely from here. Moore assembled the fragments that existed before him and gave them a shape. But he did something more interesting than simply tell the story. He embedded the story inside a question, and the question is more important than the story. The framing of the Killing Joke is this. The Joker, having escaped from Arkham Asylum, enacts a scheme whose purpose is to prove a philosophical point. His point, and he argues it with the specific conviction of someone who has organized his entire existence around a single idea, is that anyone can become him. That sanity is not a sturdy thing. That the distance between an ordinary person and a person who has let everything go is exactly one bad day. That the difference between Batman and the Joker, between the detective and the clown, between the person who held on and the person who let go, is nothing more than luck and circumstance. All it takes is one bad day to reduce the sanest man alive to lunacy. That's how far the world is from where I am. Just one bad day. To prove this point, he inflicts a very bad day on Commissioner Gordon. Deliberately, methodically, with the specific cruelty of a scientist designing an experiment. And the argument of the story is, does it work? Does one bad day break a good man? Gordon survives, holds on, does not become what the Joker wanted him to become. And Batman, arriving at the end of the story, finds the Joker in the rain and offers something extraordinary. An offer of help, of rehabilitation, of a way out of the cycle they have both been trapped in for so long. We could work together. I could rehabilitate you. It doesn't have to end with one of us dead. The Joker declines, not with rage, with something almost like sadness. He tells a joke. It is a very old joke, about two men escaping from an asylum, crossing rooftops in the dark. One jumps across safely, the other is afraid he won't make it. The first man shines his flashlight across the gap. I could walk across on that, says the second man. But what if you turn the light off when I'm halfway? The Joker laughs at his own joke, in the rain, and in the famous final panels of the story, Batman begins to laugh too, haltingly, strangely, against himself. And then the laughter stops, and the story ends. What happened in those final panels has been debated since 1988, and will probably be debated as long as people read comics. Did Batman kill the Joker? Did the laughter break something open between them? Did they reach, briefly, something that could be called understanding? Moore himself has given deliberately ambiguous answers. Bolland's art supports multiple readings. The story declines to tell you which one is right. But the origin, the failed comedian, the bad day, the accident, is explicitly framed in The Killing Joke as the Joker's own memory, his own account. And the story cannot resist noting that the Joker is not a reliable source about himself. Sometimes I remember it one way, sometimes another. If I'm going to have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice. Multiple choice. This sentence, this precise and gleeful sentence, is the most honest thing The Killing Joke says about its own origin story. It is an origin story told by someone who does not believe in origin stories, or who believes in too many of them to commit to one, or who understands that the origin story is not the point, that the point is what comes after, what the story produces, what the person doing the remembering needs the past to be in order to make sense of the present. The Killing Joke gave the Joker an origin. Then it told you not to trust it. Then it dared you to tell the difference. This is the gift and the frustration of the story. It is the reason that everything written after it has to work around it, because it got there first, and it got there in the most interesting possible way, which was to make the origin story a story about origin stories, and leave the actual origin untouched. A detail worth holding on to as you drift. Alan Moore has said, in interviews given years after the book's publication, that he regrets the sexual violence in the story, that he would make different choices now. that some of what he wrote was an experiment in how dark Batman material could go, and that the answer turned out to be darker than he wanted. He is not the only creator to have produced something in the Batman universe and then had a complicated relationship with what they made. The Joker tends to do that. To people who try to explain him, and to the people who created him, and to the characters in the stories, and to the readers of those stories. He gets into things. But we have not yet talked about the layer underneath the killing joke. The question of who the man was. Not in the moment of the accident, but before it. What life produced the person who went to Ace Chemicals that night? What the ordinary world had done with him before the chemicals finished the job. That is Chapter 3. Here is what the various accounts agree on when you lay them side by side and find the places where they overlap. There was a man. At some point before he became the Joker, he existed in the ordinary world. He breathed Gotham air. He walked Gotham streets. He paid for things with money he had earned or borrowed, ate food in the places ordinary people eat, slept in a room that was his, in whatever sense a room can be yours when you are renting it on terms that depend on money you are not reliably earning. He had a history. Every person has a history. The accumulation of everything that happened before the moment you are examining. The sediment of experience that produces the person who stands at the edge of any particular moment. The Joker had this history. It is just that no version of the history has ever been confirmed. The killing joke suggests a childhood that produced a certain kind of person. Someone who understood early that the world was not structured around his success, who found in comedy a framework for that understanding, who believed, for a while, that the joke was a way of making the gap bearable. The gap between what things should be and what they are. The gap between dignity and reality. The gap that comedians live in and work in and build their careers on. A mainstream fact about comedy worth holding in mind tonight. The people who study humor, psychologists, neurologists, the small academic community devoted to understanding why things are funny, have consistently found that the capacity for humor and the capacity for pain are not separate systems. The same person who finds the bleakest thing funniest has usually lived closest to it. The joke is not a way of avoiding the darkness. It is a way of standing in it long enough to report back. The man who would become the Joker understood this. Whatever else is uncertain about his history, this seems to be in all the versions that come closest to a real account. He understood that things were terrible, and he thought that was funny. And the audiences he performed for did not agree with him about that, which was itself a kind of proof of his point. There are threads in various Batman stories that reach toward the man before the chemicals. Sometimes he has a name. Jack is the most common, a name that has the quality of a placeholder, a generic name, the kind of name given to a character when the writer wants to signal that this is a type rather than a specific person. Sometimes he has a profession other than comedy. There are versions in which he is a chemist, versions in which he is a low-level criminal with ambitions that exceed his means, versions in which he is something more dangerous than a failed comedian even before the vat. What is worth holding on to about all of these threads is not that any of them is right, but what they have in common. Every version of the man before the madness shares one quality. He is a person who has lost the ability to believe that ordinary life will give him what he needs. Not angry about it, past anger. Not despairing, past despair. Arrived at a place of understanding that the world operates according to rules that he is not willing to follow and that are not designed to serve him, and that this is funny in a way that no audience will laugh at. The rules. Everyone's so attached to the rules. Nobody ever asks who wrote them. A quirky detail that appears in some of the more carefully researched accounts. The Joker, in his early career, before the crimes grew large enough to attract Batman's attention, was reportedly difficult to categorize. The GCPD detectives who first encountered him described the crimes as incomprehensible, not in the sense of chaotic, in the sense of operating according to a logic that none of them had the framework to decode. The crimes seemed to mean something, to be about something. There was a structure to them that the detectives could feel without being able to articulate. The first detective to be assigned the case full-time wrote in his notes, "It feels like he is making a point. I can't work out what the point is. I'm not sure I want to know." This is the thing that separates the Joker from every other villain in Gotham's long and crowded history of villains. The sense that what he is doing is an argument. Not a crime in pursuit of money or power or revenge. Not even a crime in pursuit of chaos, exactly. Because chaos implies the absence of intention, and the Joker is never without intention. He is making a point. He has always been making a point. And the point is one that the world has never quite been willing to sit still long enough to hear. The question of what the point is, the full version, the complete argument that the Joker has been building through every crime and every scheme and every encounter with Batman across the decades of his career, is something we will come back to in the later hours of tonight. But it begins here, in the life before the chemicals, in whatever shaped the man who would arrive at Ace Chemicals that night with a specific relationship to the world's rules already firmly established. The rules, and what the Joker decided to do with them. Before we get there is one version of the man before the chemicals that demands its own chapter, because it is the version that existed before the killing joke, before the failed comedian, before any of the origin stories that tried to be careful and human and tragic. There was a Red Hood first, and the Red Hood is older than all of them. The Red Hood is a name, and a mask, and a position, and understanding it is essential to understanding why the Joker's origin is not one mystery, but several mysteries stacked on top of each other. The Red Hood goes back to the earliest years of the Joker's existence in the comics, back to the original stories, the ones published in the 1940s when the character was new and the writers were still working out what he was. In those stories, before the modern era's interest in backstory and psychological depth, the Joker simply appeared. He committed crimes. He was baroque, theatrical, deadly. He wore a playing card on his persona the way some people wear a belief. And his origin was not a question anyone had thought to ask yet, because origin stories were not yet the vocabulary the medium used to build its characters. Then came the question. As Batman's universe grew more sophisticated, as readers began to want more than the immediate story, the question of where the Joker came from became something that writers began to attempt to answer. And one answer that emerged early, before the killing joke, before Alan Moore's careful architecture, was the Red Hood. In the pre-killing joke version of the myth, the man who would become the Joker was already a criminal before the chemicals. Not a failed comedian, not a desperate man making one terrible choice, a person who had already crossed a line, who had already made the decision to operate outside the ordinary world's rules, and who used the identity of the Red Hood as a mask behind which multiple people could hide. The Red Hood was a rotating identity, a designation rather than a person. Different criminals wore it at different times, the way criminal organizations use interchangeable roles to prevent any single member from being too essential or too visible. The man who went into Ace Chemicals wearing the Red Hood was one of many who had worn it. He was not the first and was not meant to be the last. What is worth sitting with about this version is what it does to the tragedy. In the killing joke version, the failed comedian version, the man at the center of the story is a victim of circumstance. His crime is desperation. He is pushed into a situation he should not have entered by forces that any reasonable person could understand, even if not excuse. The chemicals do the rest. The tragedy is that one very bad set of circumstances transformed a person who could have been ordinary into something the world has never been able to contain. In the Red Hood version, the man was already this, already criminal, already outside, already operating in the space where the ordinary rules do not apply. The chemicals did not create the Joker out of an innocent man. The chemicals created the Joker out of someone who had already decided that innocence was a constraint he did not wish to maintain. I didn't fall into madness. I walked in, found it very comfortable. The difference between these two versions is not just biographical, it is moral. The failed comedian version produces a Joker whose existence is an indictment of the world. Look what you did to a person. Look what desperation and accident and the specific cruelty of Gotham's social structure produced. The Red Hood version produces a Joker whose existence is a choice. Look what a person did with themselves. Look at the decision being made here. The first version makes the Joker the world's fault. The second version makes the Joker his own. Batman has his own view on which is closer to true. We will hear that view in Chapter 7. But for now, the Red Hood sits in the record as the oldest layer of the Joker's origin. The layer that was there before anyone tried to make the origins sympathetic, before anyone felt the need to explain the Joker as a product of something rather than a producer of it. The Red Hood is also relevant to one of the most disturbing answers to the question of the Joker's origin, an answer proposed much later that builds on the rotating identity of the Red Hood in a direction that nobody who first encountered it was quite prepared for. That answer involves not one Joker, but three. In 2020, a story was published called 3 Jokers. It was written by Jeff Johns, illustrated by Jason Fabok, and it asked a question that the comics had been circling for years without quite landing on. What if the Joker, the specific Joker, the one who has done all these things across all these decades, is not one person? What if the Red Hood's rotating identity never stopped rotating? The premise of 3 Jokers is this. Batman, using the Mobius chair, an artifact of near omniscience that he had access to briefly, asked it the identity of the Joker. He expected one name. The chair gave him 3. 3 Jokers. Not successors to each other, not one after another in a line. 3 simultaneously. 3 people at the same time, each operating as the Joker, each believing or not caring about whether the others exist, each contributing to the accumulated history of crimes and escapes and returns that fills the file with no first page. The story distinguishes between them by personality and purpose. There is the criminal, the original, the oldest, the one whose violence is instrumental even when it appears random. There is the comedian, the one who is genuinely funny, or believes he is, the one for whom the joke is the point and the harm is the punctuation. And there is the clown, the most recent, the most theatrical, the one who is performing the role of the Joker the way an actor performs a role, with full awareness that it is a performance and full commitment to it regardless. The original. Everything that came after was just someone trying to do me. It's the best bit. The gag. The whole thing is the gag. You're all in on it, and you don't even know. I am the Joker. I have always been the Joker. Whatever it took to become this, I became it. This framework does several things at once, some more comfortable than others. It explains the inconsistencies. The Joker's history, read as the history of one person, contains contradictions that have troubled careful readers for decades. Tonal inconsistencies, physical inconsistencies, inconsistencies of knowledge and personality that don't quite resolve into one coherent character. 3 People explains this. 3 people with 3 different purposes and 3 different understandings of the role they are performing would produce exactly these inconsistencies. It also makes the Joker's origin not a single event, but a phenomenon. Not a man who fell into a vat, but an identity. A recurring, renewable identity that the Red Hood structure enabled, that certain kinds of people are drawn to fill, that perhaps cannot be ended by any single arrest or death, because the identity itself is what continues, passing from one vessel to the next. You keep looking for where I started. Did it occur to you that I might not have? Historians still debate whether Three Jokers is meant to be taken as literal continuity or as a metaphorical framework for understanding the characters' inconsistencies. The story itself does not press the point harder than it needs to. It presents the possibility and lets it sit. What the framework does, at minimum, is this. It takes the question of the Joker's origin and expands it past the point where a single answer could contain it. It is not one man's story. It is a Gotham story. A story about an identity that Gotham produces and reproduces, that the city generates the way it generates other things, the corruption, the crime families, the particular quality of fog that sits above the river, as an expression of what it is and what it does to the people inside it. But there are people who have studied the Joker up close, not in the comics, not in the abstract, but in the clinical sense. People who sat across tables from him in Arkham and asked him questions and listened to his answers and made notes and tried to build an understanding from the material that was actually in front of them. Those people have things to say about where he comes from, and what they say is different from everything we have discussed so far. Chapter 6 is about the doctors. It begins in the quieter part of the night, and we go there slowly. The clinical file on the Joker at Arkham Asylum is, according to the doctors who have contributed to it, the most unusual document in the institution's history. Not because it is incomplete, though it is. Not because the subject has been uncooperative, though he has, in ways that the word uncooperative does not quite capture. But because the document has a quality that clinical documents are not supposed to have, which is that it is interesting. Genuinely, unexpectedly, uncomfortably interesting. The Joker in a clinical setting is a different phenomenon than the Joker in a crime scene report, and the doctors who have encountered him there have not, for the most part, been able to maintain the detachment that their training recommends. He gets into things. We have said this before. The first serious clinical assessment of the Joker at Arkham was conducted by a doctor whose name appears in the records only by initial, a practice the institution has used for the protection of staff members who treat high-profile patients. The assessment ran to 60 pages. The concluding section, which is the part that other doctors have most often quoted in their own notes, reads in part, "I have been unable to determine, with any clinical confidence, the presence of a diagnosable condition. This is not because the subject does not have a condition. It is because the condition, whatever it is, does not correspond to the diagnostic categories available to me. He is not psychotic in the sense I understand psychosis. He is not personality disordered in the patterns that classification systems describe. He is not dissociative, not delusional, not cognitively impaired. He is, as far as I can determine, entirely oriented to reality. He knows where he is. He knows who he is. He is, in the clinical sense, competent. And he has done the things he has done. I do not have a category for this. I have begun to suspect that my categories are the problem." This assessment was followed by dozens of others, conducted by doctors with varying levels of confidence and varying approaches, and the consensus that emerges from the stack of them is not a diagnosis, but a description. And the description is this. He is a person who has organized himself entirely and deliberately around a single principle. And the principle resists every clinical framework that tries to pathologize it. The principle, as the doctors have extracted it from sessions across the decades, is something like this. Reality, as most people experience it, is a performance. The social contract, the norms, the rules, the expectations, these are not natural features of the world, but choices, agreed upon fictions that serve certain purposes and constrain certain possibilities. The Joker has chosen not to agree. And his refusal to agree is not the refusal of a person who cannot understand what he is refusing. It is the refusal of a person who understands it perfectly and finds it funny. Everyone's pretending. The man in the suit, the cop with the gun, the judge with the gavel. I'm the only one who stopped pretending. And somehow, I'm the crazy one. Dr. Harleen Quinzel, before she became what she became, before Arkham and the Joker and the specific trajectory her career took, wrote a paper early in her psychiatric training about what she called the supersanity hypothesis. The paper was not widely read at the time. It has been read very widely since, and argued about, and rejected, and reconsidered, and argued about again. The hypothesis is this. Some of Gotham's most extreme cases are not mad in the sense of being disconnected from reality. They are mad in the sense of being connected to a different reality, one that exists alongside the ordinary world, in the gaps between what people say and what they mean, in the space between the performance of civilization and its actual structure. These cases have developed, whether through trauma or through something more fundamental to their psychology, a perception of the world that is more honest than ordinary perception, in the sense that it strips away the fictions that ordinary perception depends on. The world without its fictions is very dark, and some minds, confronted with that darkness, build something new in it, new logics, new aesthetics, new ways of moving through a reality that most people cannot see. The Joker, in Quinzel's paper, is the example she returns to most. The clearest case of a mind that has traded ordinary sanity for something else. Not a lesser version of sanity, not a broken version, but a different version. A version that perceives what others cannot and is ungovernable by the agreements others make. Do you know why I find that so fascinating? Because it means the question isn't whether you're sane. It's which version of reality you've decided to live in. The clinical record does not resolve the question of the Joker's origin. What it does, what the stack of assessments and session notes and observational reports produces, read together, is a portrait of a mind that arrived at Arkham already complete, already fully formed, with a logic that had been in place long enough to be comfortable, a worldview that showed no signs of instability in the clinical sense, a self-concept that was, in the strange language of the institution, entirely intact. Whatever made him was finished before the doctors got to him. The chemical vat, if it was the chemical vat, or the decision, if it was a decision, had done its work long before Arkham's lights found him in the fog. But Batman has been looking longer than any doctor, and Batman has a conclusion, a specific, considered, carefully examined conclusion that he has arrived at after years of being in closer proximity to the Joker than any clinical professional. Chapter 7 belongs to the detective. Batman does not discuss the Joker easily. This is worth noting before we get to what he believes, because the difficulty of the discussion is itself information. Bruce Wayne has faced things in his career that would break most people, things that have come very close to breaking him, things whose full weight he has declined to show anyone fully, carrying it in the particular private way of a person who decided very early that they were not going to put it down. And among all those things, the Joker occupies a specific place that is different from the others. Not because the Joker is the most dangerous, he is very dangerous, but Gotham has produced dangerous people before and will produce them again. Not because the Joker has hurt him most, though the list of people the Joker has hurt who matter to Bruce Wayne is a list he cannot read without cost. But because the Joker is the one problem that does not submit to the methods that work on all other problems. Batman is a detective. Detection is the discipline of moving from what you observe to what is true, following the trail of evidence through whatever density of confusion and misdirection surrounds it until you arrive at the fact that explains everything else. This method has not failed him on any case in his career. Every riddle has an answer. Every crime has a cause. Every person who has ever confronted him has a history that, properly understood, explains the confrontation. Every person except one. I have investigated the Joker more thoroughly than any case in my career. I know Gotham's criminal history better than anyone alive. I know what people become and why. And I cannot find the bottom of this. What Batman has concluded, arrived at slowly, over years, with the specific reluctance of someone who prefers conclusions he can act on, is not quite an explanation. It is a boundary. The boundary of what the detective's method can reach. He believes. The Joker is not a product of circumstance in the way that the other villains are products of circumstance. The other great enemies of his career, Ra's al Ghul, shaped by grief and chemistry and 600 years of the Lazarus Pit. Two-Face, shaped by the acid and the specific wound it opened. The Riddler, shaped by the need for recognition that the world withheld. Each of them legible, if you are willing to do the work of reading them. Each of them the result of something that happened, something you can trace, something you can understand even if you cannot excuse. The Joker, in Batman's considered view, may be the exception, may be the case where the thing happens so early, or so completely, or in a way so fully integrated into who the person is, that the cause and the effect cannot be separated. That there is no version of him to point to and say, that is the man before. Because the man before may have been this, may have always been arranging himself toward this, the chemical vat, or the red hood, or the bad day, or whatever it was, just the moment when what was already there became visible. I think he was always this. I think whatever happened to him may have been the last thing that needed to happen. Not the cause, the occasion. The occasion, not the cause. This distinction is Batman's contribution to the question of the Joker's origin, and it is more significant than it first appears. If the chemical vat is the cause, if the accident is the explanation, then there is a world in which it didn't happen, and in that world the man is still the failed comedian, still the debtor, still the expectant father, still the ordinary Gotham person whose ordinariness contains the sadness and the humor and the perception that the gap between what things should be and what they are is the funniest and most terrible thing about being alive. But if the vat is only the occasion, if the Joker was already the Joker before the chemicals touched him, already arranged toward this, already moving in this direction, then the world where the accident doesn't happen is not a world without the Joker. It is a world where the Joker finds a different occasion. This is the most unsettling version of the Joker's origin, and it is the version that Batman cannot rule out, even after everything. Not something that happened to a person who was always happening. A specific quality of mind meeting a specific moment and becoming what it was always going to become. Batman has not shared this conclusion widely. He has shared it with Alfred in the late hours of a few difficult nights. He has shared fragments of it with Dick Grayson, who received them with the particular quiet that means he is filing them away to think about later. He has not shared it with the Joker directly. The Joker, who knows Batman better than anyone who has studied him clinically, knows anyway, and finds it very funny. He finally figured it out. Took him long enough. Good detective. The Joker's own accounts of his origin are the subject of Chapter 8, and they are, in their way, the most informative accounts of all. Not because they are true, but because of what they reveal about the person doing the telling. The Joker has given many answers to the question of where he comes from. Every answer is different. Every answer is delivered with the same quality of conviction, absolute, settled, without a trace of the hesitation that marks a person who is uncertain or making something up. He does not tell these stories in the tentative register of a person constructing a fiction. He tells them in the register of a person reporting a fact, with the specific ease of someone who has no emotional investment in whether you believe them or not. This quality, the ease, the lack of investment, is itself information. Most people, when they tell you the story of where they came from, are performing something for you, performing the version of themselves that their history is supposed to explain. The vulnerable person, or the person who overcame, or the person shaped by a specific pain into a specific strength. The story of origin is also, always, a pitch for a particular understanding of who the person is now and why they deserve to be seen that way. The Joker is not pitching anything. This is what makes his origin stories different from everyone else's. He is not trying to explain himself, or justify himself, or produce in you a particular understanding of him. He is producing in you a particular experience. The stories are not arguments, they are performances. And the performance is not about the content of the story, but about what the story does to the listener. Here are some of the versions he has given. The circus version. In this version, the Joker grew up in a traveling carnival, not a metaphor, a literal one. The canvas tents and sawdust floors, and the specific community of people who have decided to live outside ordinary geography and ordinary employment, moving from town to town with their skills and their strangeness. He was a clown. He was good at it. He found, in the performance of exaggerated emotion for crowds who had paid specifically to experience exaggerated emotion, something that felt more honest than the ordinary world's performance of ordinary emotion. When he left the carnival, the reasons vary, he found that he could not stop performing, that the exaggeration had become the baseline, that the clown face was the real face. I loved the circus. Everyone's allowed to be ridiculous there. Everyone's allowed to be exactly what they are. Most honest place I ever lived. The laboratory version. In this version, the Joker was a scientist, a chemist specifically, which neatly explains the relationship with Ace Chemicals as something more than accident. A man who understood the compounds, who had perhaps even worked with them, who chose the vat rather than fell into it. He discovered, through his scientific work, that the boundary between matter and meaning, between the physical world and the human interpretation of it, was entirely constructed. That the molecules that produced happiness were the same molecules that produced despair in different configurations. That the chemistry of the joke and the chemistry of the horror were the same chemistry. Molecules don't care what they mean. That's the punchline. All of it. Every single thing. Just molecules not caring. The soldier version. In this version, the Joker came back from a war. Not a specific war he names, not a conflict with dates and geography that you could look up. A war in the sense of an experience that showed him something about what human beings do to each other when the ordinary rules are suspended. When the fiction of civilization is explicitly acknowledged as a fiction, and people do what they were always capable of doing without it. He came back unable to unsee this, unable to perform the ordinary agreements with the conviction they require, unable to find, in the rituals of ordinary life, anything that wasn't obviously theater. You see men at their most honest during a war. Every year after that, you're watching them put the mask back on. Some of us just don't. The inheritance version. In this version, there is no accident, no vat, no chemicals, no traumatic event. The Joker has always been the Joker. He was born with the perception. He grew up with the knowledge. The world, encountered fresh, without the protective coatings that ordinary upbringing applies, revealed itself immediately as the thing he knows it to be. Absurd, contingent, maintained by agreements that no one has actually signed. The laugh was the first response. Everything else followed. I've always found everything funny. People keep asking why, like it needs a reason. Have you looked at it? Really looked? It's hilarious. The charitable reading of these versions is that the Joker is protecting something, that there is a real story, a true origin underneath the performances, and that the performances exist to keep it safe, to prevent the thing that matters from being seen and understood and used against him. The less charitable reading is that there is no real story. That the Joker genuinely does not have a preferred version because the version is not the point. That each story is true in the sense that it captures something real about how he understands himself. And the fact that they contradict each other is not a problem. It is the whole point. The contradiction is the message. The impossibility of the single origin is the answer to the question. Pick whichever one you like best. I don't mind.
I'll be whatever you need me to be. That's the joke.
There is a reading of the Joker's multiple origins as a philosophical position. The argument goes like this. Identity is the story we tell about ourselves. The specific story, the sequence of events, the wound that explains the behavior, the moment when the person who came before became the person who stands here now, is always a construction. Always a selection of certain things and an omission of others, designed to produce a coherent narrative that feels like truth because it is organized the way truth is organized. The Joker has simply made this visible, has refused to select one story and stick to it, insisting instead on the full absurdity, the fact that he could be any of these things, that any of these things could have made him, that the specifics are less important than the result that stands in front of you now. If you want to know who I am, don't ask where I came from. Look at what I've done with wherever I came from. This is, in its way, the most honest answer anyone has ever given to the question of their own origin. It is just that the honesty here is very dark. Let's take the 3 readings that have structured the Joker's existence in the stories told about him, and sit with each of them for a moment. These are not the same as the 3 Jokers, 3 literal people filling one identity. These are 3 ways of understanding the single phenomenon that the Joker represents. 3 frameworks that his various creators and readers and antagonists have used to try to make sense of something that does not quite want to be made sense of. The first reading, the clown. In this reading, the Joker is fundamentally about performance. The white face and the green hair and the purple suit are a costume, and every costume is a philosophy, a statement about how the wearer has decided to present themselves to the world. The clown costume says, I am aware that this is a performance. I am aware that you know it is a performance. I am performing anyway, with maximum commitment and maximum excess, and the excess is the point. Because ordinary behavior is also a performance. The suit and the tie and the serious face are as much a costume as this one. And the only difference is that most people performing ordinary behavior have agreed not to call it a performance. The clown reading of the Joker is the most visually legible. It is what the makeup is for, what the laughter signals, what the theatrical crimes express. He is showing you the artifice of ordinary life by performing an exaggerated version of it. The joke is on everyone who thinks their seriousness is more real than his humor. The difference between me and everyone else? I'm the only one who admits I'm performing. That's not madness. That's honesty. The second reading, the comedian. In this reading, the Joker is fundamentally about meaning, specifically about the gap between the meanings we assign things and the meaninglessness that underlies them. The comedian's job is to find this gap and live in it, to locate the place where the story we tell about the world rubs against the world itself and produces friction. The Joker's crimes in this reading are jokes. Not funny jokes necessarily, not in the sense that you would laugh at them, but jokes in the structural sense, setups that reveal something true about reality by taking an assumption to its logical conclusion and watching the conclusion land. The best version of this reading comes from the Killing Joke's argument about bad days. The joke the Joker is telling is this: you believe that the people you love and trust are stable, that the social fabric is real, that the agreements holding everything together are strong. The punchline is that they are not. That one bad day, one coincidence, one accident, one very particular piece of very bad luck, and the whole structure reveals itself as what it always was: paper, held together by the belief that it is stone. The comedian reading makes the Joker's violence the setup to a punchline. The punchline is your reaction. The punchline is Commissioner Gordon holding on. The punchline is Batman in the rain, starting to laugh. When it's funny, really funny, you don't decide to laugh. It just happens. That's what I'm after. The moment you can't help it. The third reading, The Criminal. In this reading, all of the above is a framework that the Joker has built around something much simpler and much darker. He is a person who does harm, who has done more harm to more people over a longer period than almost any individual in recorded history, who has organized his life around the production of harm and who finds, in the production of it, whatever it is that he needs to find. The philosophy is real. The arguments about performance and meaning and bad days are real arguments, seriously held. But they are also covers. The comedian and the clown readings give the Joker's violence an intellectual framework that can be engaged with, disagreed with, argued against. The criminal reading strips that away. It says, underneath the framework, a person is making choices, and the choices are to hurt people. And the framework is, in part, a very sophisticated way of not having to look at that directly. I'm very good at this. That's not nothing. Whatever I am very, very good at this. All three readings are true. All three are partial. The Joker is the clown and the comedian and the criminal simultaneously, and the readings do not resolve into each other neatly, which is the whole point. He is not one thing that can be explained. He is a phenomenon that requires multiple frameworks and is adequately captured by none of them. This is what makes him the most compelling villain in the history of the medium. Not the body count, not the aesthetics, the inexhaustibility, the way he resists being fully seen. Let's talk about the city for a while. Because the Joker did not emerge from nowhere. He emerged from Gotham. And Gotham is not a neutral backdrop against which the story of the Joker plays out. Gotham is a character, and like all characters, it produces certain outcomes by being what it is. Gotham City, in the DC universe, is the city that corruption built. Its founding families, the Waynes, the Kanes, the Cobblepots, the Elliots, did not build it cleanly. Its political history is a history of deals made in the dark, of institutions that served their own maintenance rather than the population they were supposed to serve. Its police department, in its years before the arrival of certain key figures, was an organization more committed to the management of crime than its elimination. Its architecture, its geography, its very weather, the fog, the rain, the particular quality of Gotham's darkness, which is darker than other cities' darkness, all of it conspires to produce a feeling that other cities do not have. The feeling is this. In Gotham, the gap between what things are supposed to be and what they are is wider than anywhere else. The mask is thinner. The pretense is less convincing. The person standing on a Gotham street corner watching the city move around them can see the wires more clearly than they could in any other place. The Joker sees the wires, has always seen them. And Gotham is the city where seeing the wires does not make you an outlier. It makes you someone who is paying attention. This does not explain the Joker. It does not justify anything he has done. But it provides something that the individual origin stories cannot provide: context. The Joker is a Gotham product, specifically and precisely a Gotham product in the way that other cities produce other specific and precise things. Gotham produces extremity. It produces people who have been pressed by the specific combination of the city's corruption and the city's visibility and the city's strange relationship with its own darkness into forms that other cities do not quite generate. A detail worth noting: the academic literature in the DC universe, the criminologists, the sociologists, the urban theorists who study Gotham as a phenomenon, has consistently noted that Gotham's villain population is not random. It is not the case that people go mad in Gotham at higher rates than elsewhere. It is that the madness that Gotham produces has a specific character. It is theatrical. It is philosophical. It is, in almost every case, organized around an idea, a particular argument about the world, a specific point being made, a claim that the crime is designed to demonstrate. Gotham's criminals are making arguments. The Joker is making the loudest argument, with the most evidence, and without any interest in whether anyone agrees with it. Him. Beautiful place, Gotham. Really is. All that darkness and all those people pretending not to see it. I've always felt right at home. Batman emerged from Gotham too. This is the thing that neither of them can quite get past. They are both Gotham products, both shaped by the city's specific combination of visibility and corruption, both organized around a central argument about what the world is and what to do about it. The argument they are making is the opposite argument. Batman's argument is the darkness can be fought. The Joker's argument is the darkness is the truth. But they are both making it in Gotham, in the rain, in the particular darkness that is Gotham's alone. The city made them both, and the city watches them enact their argument over and over with the patient indifference of stone. We have been in the dark for a long time now, and you are probably drifting at the edges of sleep, which is exactly where this story wants you. Let it carry you a little further. There is one more thing worth saying before the night closes, the one thing that every version of the Joker's origin agrees on, the single point of consistency across the Killing Joke and the Red Hood and the Three Jokers and the clinical files and the Joker's own endlessly varying accounts of himself. He laughs. Not as a symptom, not as a mask for something else, though it is sometimes that too. As an expression of something genuine, the most genuine thing about him, possibly the only thing about him that has not been layered over with performance and philosophy and the deliberate complexity of a person who does not want to be legible. The laugh is real. Whatever the origin, the chemicals, the choice, the genetics, the city, the bad day, the circus, the laboratory, the war. What it produced is a person who finds things funny. Not everything, not indiscriminately, but specifically and with real feeling. The gap between the world's pretensions and the world's reality. The distance between what we say we value and what we do. The specific absurdity of human beings maintaining with great seriousness the fictions that organize their lives, while the reality those fictions are supposed to contain keeps leaking through. This is genuinely funny. Not in a way that makes the harm less harmful, not in a way that excuses anything, but the observation is correct. The gap is real. The pretensions are pretensions. The fictions are fictions. And a person who can see this clearly enough to find it funny is not, in the clinical sense, wrong. The doctors who have spent the most time with him in Arkham, the ones who have come closest to something like understanding without losing themselves in the process, have consistently noted this. Not that the Joker is right, but that he is not simply wrong, that his perception of the thing he is perceiving is accurate, even if what he does with the perception is catastrophic. You want to know where I came from? I'll tell you. I looked at the world. I really looked. And then I couldn't stop laughing. Batman has heard this, has heard variations of it across years of encounters, rooftops, interrogation rooms, the long corridors of Arkham at the end of the long corridors of a case. He has not found an answer to it, not one that satisfies him, because the answer would require him to argue that the world is not what the Joker says it is, and Bruce Wayne, who has seen what the world does to people, who watched it take his parents in an alley when he was 8 years old, who has built his entire existence on the premise that the darkness is real and must be met rather than accepted. Bruce Wayne cannot quite make that argument with full conviction. He knows the gap is there. He has organized his life around closing it rather than laughing at it. But knowing it is there, and being what Batman is, requires a choice that the Joker did not make. And Bruce Wayne sometimes, in the quiet of the cave at 3 a.m, wonders about the distance between the choice he made and the one the Joker made. Not very long, not often. And then he goes back to work. But the question stays. The file with no first page stays open. And the laugh, somewhere in the architecture of Gotham, echoes along the walls of a city that has been having this argument with itself for as long as anyone can remember. The laugh
And the silence after it. That is where the Joker comes from. Whatever made him, that is what it made. A person who lives in the silence after the laugh, who finds the silence funny too. Let's end in a specific place. Not a rooftop, not a crime scene, not the file room of the GCPD or the clinical corridors of Arkham Asylum. A cell. A particular cell in the east wing of Arkham, in the hours between midnight and morning, when the building has given itself back to its own sounds and the night watch staff are making their rounds in the amber light. The cell is quiet. The cells in this wing of the building are designed for quiet, soundproofed in the way that this patient's cell has had to be, repeatedly, because sound is one of the things he uses, and the building has learned over time that reducing what he can use reduces what he does with it. He is awake. He is almost always awake in the night, not because he cannot sleep, but because night in Gotham has a quality that he finds preferable to day. The city reveals itself more honestly at night. The performances thin out. The exhaustion of maintaining the fiction of the day shows in the faces of the people moving through the dark, the late workers and the insomniacs, and the people doing things they would not do in daylight. He lies on his back on the narrow institutional bed and looks at the ceiling, and thinks about the question that everyone asks him, and that he has spent decades answering in every way except directly. Where do you come from? He thinks, there was a man. He doesn't always remember the man clearly. The memories shift the way memories do, reorganizing themselves around the feelings they are attached to, rather than the facts, softening some things and sharpening others in ways that serve the story rather than the record. The man had a face, a different face before. A voice that didn't carry the laughter in it the way his voice carries it now. A relationship with the world that included the ordinary investments, the roof over his head, the person who loved him, the future that was supposed to unfold in the ordinary way. He thinks, and then whatever it was. The vat, the fall, the decision, the moment, the occasion. The thing that he tells differently every time, because he genuinely is not sure which version is the one that happened. Because the chemicals took the certainty along with the pigmentation and the hair color, and whatever had been holding his face in the arrangement faces are supposed to stay in. He thinks, it doesn't matter. This is the conclusion he has reached across all the years and all the returns to this cell and all the doctors and all the versions of the story. Not that the question is unanswerable, though it is. Not that the answer is unimportant, though it might be. But that the question points in the wrong direction. Backward. Toward a person who is not here anymore, in a moment that is not happening anymore, asking about causes when the effect is the only thing that is actually present. He is the effect. He is entirely here, in this cell, in this present moment, with everything that he is, and everything he has done, and everything he intends to do when the door opens again, as it always opens, as it will open. The past is funny. The future is funny. The present, this narrow bed, this soundproofed cell, this building that has been trying to contain him for decades, is the funniest thing of all. Just that. One small note of it, in the dark, to no one in particular. Not a performance, not a signal, just the thing itself, rising up the way laughter does when you have finally stopped trying to explain it. And then the cell is quiet again. Outside, Gotham breathes. The rain has come back. It always comes back. Running in the gutters and against the stone of the building and down the faces of the gargoyles on the corners of Arkham's towers. The bat signal is off tonight. The city is as quiet as the city gets, which is not very quiet, but quieter than it was. The file with no first page sits in its cabinet in the GCPD Records Division, 2 keys required, waiting for someone to add to it or close it. No one has closed it. No one expects to. And in a cell in the east wing of Arkham Asylum, a man who may have been a comedian, or a chemist, or a criminal, or a clown, or a soldier, or a person who simply looked at the world
and could not stop laughing.
Lies on a narrow bed in the dark and waits for the morning, and finds the waiting funny too. Good night, Gotham. The Joker will be back. He always is. So let the story set you down where it found you. The file has no first page. It never will. The question of where the Joker comes from is not a question that resolves. It is a question that deepens the longer you sit with it, into something that is less a mystery to be solved and more a truth to be lived with. The truth is this: some things in the world are not products of cause and effect in the clean way that cause and effect usually works. Some things arrive as themselves, fully formed, internally consistent, complete in all the ways that matter, and incomplete in the ways that would make them legible. The Joker is one of these things. Gotham made him, or he made himself, or the chemicals made him, or the bad day made him, or he was always going to be this, and the bad day was just the door he walked through. It does not change what he is now, in the present tense of the story. It does not change what he does with what he is. The question of origin matters to the doctors and the detectives because they need to believe that understanding a thing is the first step to preventing it. And they are right. Understanding does help, most of the time, with most things. This is not most things. This is the Joker. Let the night carry you down now, slowly, into the quieter dark that is on the other side of all these questions. The rain is on the stone. The gargoyles are watching. The city is as quiet as it gets. In a file cabinet in the GCPD, in a cell in Arkham, in the space between one laugh and the next, the question hangs. Open. Unanswered. Funny, if you are the kind of person who finds that funny. And whether you are or you aren't, you made it through the night. The file can wait until morning. Sleep well.